There's an old story about a man who was on trial for murder. There was strong evidence against him, but no body was ever recovered. So the lawyer, knowing that his client would probably be convicted, resorted to a trick. During his closing argument, the lawyer pointed to the courtroom door and said, "Within 1 minute, the person presumed dead in this case will walk into this courtroom." Well, the jurors were stunned, but all of them eagerly looked towards the door. A minute passed. Nothing happened. Finally, the lawyer said, "Actually, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I made up that previous statement. But all of you watched the door with anticipation. I therefore put it to you that there is reasonable doubt in this case as to whether anyone was killed. And I insist that you return a verdict of not guilty." Well, the jury was clearly confused and retired to deliberate. But only a few minutes later, the jury returned and pronounced a verdict of guilty. "But how?" demanded the lawyer. "You must have had some doubt. I saw all of you stare at the door." To which the jury foreman replied, "Oh, we all looked at the door, but your client didn't." Doubt and certainty both play an important part of life and of faith. But in the church, we like to talk about certainty much more than we like to talk about doubt. And when the church does talk about doubt, it's typically in a negative light. Many Christians struggle with the idea of doubt, but I want to suggest to you that God is bigger than our doubts and questions. While we often find doubt uncomfortable, I would suggest that God welcomes our questions and is willing to engage us to find the answers. The Bible is full of faithful believers who doubted. Abraham doubted. Moses doubted. David doubted. John the Baptist doubted. But probably the most famous story of doubt involves one whom we have come to call Doubting Thomas. In John chapter 20, we have John's account of the resurrection. We looked at the first half of the chapter on Easter Sunday. You'll remember that early in the morning, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb where Jesus' dead body was laid. But Jesus wasn't there. So she ran back to the upper room where the disciples were hiding and told them that Jesus' body was missing. Peter and John ran with Mary to the tomb to investigate. They saw the tomb was empty, but they didn't understand what had happened. And it specifically says Peter doubted. And so they returned to their hiding place. But Mary stayed behind at the tomb. And she was greeted by Jesus. And after a brief conversation, Mary hurried back to the disciples to tell them that she had seen Jesus and he's alive. But it wasn't until later that night, while the disciples were still hiding in the upper room, that Jesus appeared to them. He shows them his wounds. He pronounces a blessing upon them and then disappears. But Thomas was missing from the group. We don't know why. Maybe he was out getting groceries. Maybe he went back to the tomb for a private moment of grief. Maybe he had already given up. We don't know. All we know is that he was gone from the upper room when Jesus showed up and presented himself to the disciples. So let's take a look at what happens next from John chapter 20, beginning in verse 24. Would you read with me? But Thomas, who was called the twin, one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands, and put my finger in the mark of the nails, and my hand in his side, I will not believe." A week later, his disciples were again in the house, and Thomas was with them. Although the doors were shut, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it in my side. Do not doubt, but believe." Thomas answered him, "My Lord and my God." Notice that Jesus didn't reject Thomas's doubt. He actually embraced Thomas's questions. And the result was a deepening of Thomas's faith. Doubt can be a catalyst for faith to grow. The strongest faith isn't a faith that never doubts. The strongest faith is a faith that grows through our doubt. But before we go any further, let's explore just a little bit why we doubt. If doubt isn't necessarily a lack of faith, then where does doubt come from? Well, in my experience, there are 3 common reasons we doubt. Certainly there are more, but these are the top 3 in my experience. We have questions we can't answer. We encounter situations that seem unfair. We experience hurt we can't resolve. All 3 of these issues cause us to bring questions. And all 3 of these issues were present in Thomas as he tried to process Jesus' death. Thomas had questions he couldn't answer. Why was the one he believed was the Messiah crucified? How could that be God's plan? It seemed unfair. Why didn't God rescue Jesus? Jesus was the best man Thomas had ever known. For him to die such a gruesome death was certainly an injustice and was unfair. God is a God of justice. So how could this be? And Thomas' pain was so deep. He wondered if the last 3 years had all been a lie. How can he resolve the pain that he was feeling with God's perfect plan? Can you relate? Few of us have experienced anything as dramatic as Thomas touching the wounds of Jesus. But most of us have had questions that seem to have no answers. Or we've encountered situations that seem cruel or unfair and certainly outside of what God would want to happen. Or we've had a hurt so deep, we question everything we've ever believed or everything we thought we knew. The good news is, just like with Thomas, Jesus doesn't reject our questions or doubts. He's willing to engage our questions if we'll bring them to him. And like Thomas, our faith can grow when we bring our doubts to Jesus. It's when we walk away, when we refuse to struggle with the questions, that doubt wins. That's why it's so important for the church to be a safe place to bring our questions and doubts. As much as we like easy answers, the world is not always black and white. The church has to be a place where we are willing to explore the gray. That's one of the reasons I celebrate our small groups, but particularly our ministry of learning to tell our stories. In these workshops, we're given the opportunity to reflect on God's activity in our lives, to engage questions, and to sometimes gain new perspective. We have one of these video testimonies to show you this morning. It's a video of Janet Mason. Some of you see her back at the tech booth on Sunday mornings, and some of you know her as the key leader of our Justice and Equity group. When Janet first came to the Telling Your Story workshop, she said that she didn't think she had a story to tell, and that much of her faith was shaped by uncertainty. Yet, the group encouraged her to explore her experience, and this video is Janet's response. So please watch.
Through my lifetime of work in the social work field, I have had so many poignant life stories shared with me. I also know my family's stories and those I learn about from history and current life events. In comparison, I've often thought that in my life I've been fortunate, but that my story is not a remarkable one. To be honest, I saw myself as an awkward girl who became a follower of Jesus because of habit. It was ingrained to attend church, speak to God, participate in the rituals, and try to model Jesus' philosophy toward people. I was born into a Christian family who strongly encouraged Christian practices and traditions. I married someone with similar beliefs and who encouraged my growth and participation in the church. Throughout my life, I certainly experienced difficulties, but even during those times, I still felt a presence of God being with me and wanting the best for me. This is probably because there have been many more experiences that I thought resulted in positive changes in my life and attitude. Touring through communist East Germany before the wall came down left me with a lifetime of gratitude for this country and freedom. Choosing to meet up with Mark that day in college began a lifetime of love and going and growing together. There's the job offer at the College of Lake County, which expanded my mind, my career, and my sphere of influence. Though I feel a spiritual connection with God and Jesus and draw strength through it, I am conflicted and question my faith as well. What do I struggle with God over? Most notably, some sort of survivor's guilt. I see various family and friends with addiction issues, financial difficulties, legal challenges, relationship struggles, and other traumatic issues, and I wonder, why? How did I become so fortunate? Why am I blessed with the life that I have? I see the destruction around the world, the negative impact people using God's name has caused throughout history, the pain that people inflict upon other people, and even the devastation that nature brings. My heart breaks for the pain in the world. Where did this empathy come from? Was it developed from my desire to create a safe, nurturing world for others like my parents created for me? Or from my realization that though we are all the same in God's eyes, the world does not treat us the same? Is it from sensing God's heart breaking too? World circumstances and personal experiences continue to bring my questions to the forefront, and even without having the answers, I know I cannot take for granted this life. So I hug my husband a little more tightly and hold my family a little more closely, and I realize God is touching me a little more deeply. Connecting spiritually to an eternal God has given my life meaning and direction and strength in good days and difficult days. I can have faith despite uncertainties. Through this spiritual relationship and my relationships with others, I developed my voice. Through having my own voice, God has led me to also hear others and empower them. The habits I developed through following a Christian lifestyle has allowed me to see God's work in myself and God's work in others. The pain and troubles in the world caused me to hold on to this idea from our pastor, Jay. We are not a human being having a spiritual experience. We are a spiritual being having a human experience. God helps me to help others to have the best human experience they can and to recognize their spiritual being. God working together in all of our lives is remarkable. My name, Janet, means God's gracious gift. I want to be God's hands and feet and heart in this world and share the gift of Jesus' kindness.
Faith despite uncertainty. Thank you, Janet, for your honesty and for being willing to share your story. Doubt or uncertainty is not the enemy of faith. Doubt is often an invitation to a deeper faith. And the church should be the safest place to ask those hard questions. This is particularly true among young people. As teens turn into adults, they're trying to make sense of the world and of their faith. And we have to let them ask questions, even those questions that make us uncomfortable. But at the same time, we need to be careful not to romanticize doubt. For some, doubt can be painful, and seasons of doubt can turn into bitterness and even the abandonment of faith. Left unexamined, doubt can overtake us and leave us in despair. So what do we do when doubt is unwelcome? How do we ensure that doubt doesn't become destructive? So real quickly, let me give you 3 ways to cope with doubt. First, recognize that doubt is normal. Every honest believer experiences doubt at some time. It's a natural process that allows us to discover new aspects of our faith and of God. If we are to grow in our relationship with God, we have to discover new things about God, and those generally come through questions and doubt. Doubt is a normal part of faith. But second, doubt your doubt. Don't ignore your doubt, but don't put your trust in doubt either. Just because you can't explain something doesn't mean it's untrue. If we begin to consider doubt as our main focus, it will diminish belief. Sometimes all we can do is trust. All we can do is have faith in spite of our doubt. Faith in the midst of uncertainty. Finally, engage God in your doubt. Jesus didn't reject Thomas because he doubted. Jesus reached out to him in love with an invitation to believe. Faith is trusting God even when we can't see God at work in our lives or in the world. As you've heard before, faith is trusting in the light even in the midst of darkness.